on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
You're very welcome along. Monday Night Rugby. We have Mr. Andy Dunne back in studio. Hello.
Hello, Joe.
And Gerry Thornley of the Irish Times with us as well. Gerry, good evening.
Good evening, Joe.
So the last time you two were on, we got a phenomenal response. And they were saying, why don't you get Andy Dunne on a bit more with Gerry?
More Andy Dunne, I'd say they were saying, no?
No, both of you. But the answer, of course, is Andy Dunne's not bothered coming in unless it's a test match. I mean, there's no point ringing Andy Dunne the weekend of a URC game. So, do you want to come in and talk about it Monday? He's not available. He has no interest. He's a test match animal.
Correct.
Yeah, I just want to put that to bed because don't off the ball realise how much we love Andy Dunne. Yes, we realise he hates us. Gerry, meanwhile, week in, week out, solid performance.
Yeah, I don't have the choice that he has.
Yes. So, well, quite the weekend. We're going to focus in Ireland, obviously. Ireland 13-10 winners against Australia. We'd Wales 12, Georgia 13. We might do a follow-up piece on that situation. Scotland, you feel, are going along quite nicely, our future World Cup opponents. 52 points to 29 winners against Argentina. England 25, New Zealand 25, and then France continue their winning ways at 35-17 win against Japan. So Ireland 13, Australia 10. Gerry, I'm getting a distinct sense of what have you done for us lately, Ireland? I mean, if you're going to beat Australia, at least put on a show. This isn't good enough. This isn't good enough.
Yeah, well, there's that way of looking at it for sure, but then, you know, even Arsenal have had a few boring 1-0 wins this season. You can't go through the whole season just playing great every time. And if you said beforehand that they were going to lose Johnny Sexton, what was it, 15 minutes before kick-off, thereabouts? That Jack Crowley was going to make his first start for Ireland at 10, having played just 6 games there for Munster. And that Ross Byrne was going to come out of the wilderness and land the winning kick. Beforehand, you might well have taken that. I thought it'd been, as an overall package to November, I think one of the downsides of being a really good side and number one ranked the world and having a series win in All Blacks is that people analyse you more. And both South Africa certainly and Australia have big physical sides and gone after the Irish breakdown, and it's caused us problems. But Ireland found a way to win both games, and on Saturday, without being particularly fluid in attack, and even though the attack was well shackled by Australia, they found a way to win, and the defence was magnificent. It was huge energy and belief. Everybody, the work rate of everybody getting up off the ground, the tackle count led by the ridiculous Josh van der Flier and Caelan Doris, and the tackle figures for the tight five. It was a mighty effort, and they found a way to win. So I think, put it this way, Joe, I'm not saying it was great. I'm not saying that the performances scaled the heights of New Zealand in the summertime, but they've got a winning habit, and they found a way to win in difficult circumstances that, had they not done so, I think the whole Johnny Sexton dependent theory would have been given so much more oxygen now, and would even have seeped through to the players. Now, I'm not saying that in some degree they weren't missing Johnny, they always are, but then again, in 3 World Cup cycles, the All Blacks were never quite the same side without Dan Carter. You know, this is what happens with your generational players.
Yeah.
As for the game itself, Andy, I mean, it was 3 points apiece at 65 minutes, so it was not a classic on the scoreboard front. Bundyaki try 66, Patea try 70, and then Ross Byrne with the winning penalty on 76. So what are you saying about the Irish performance in broad terms, first of all?
I would fully agree there with Gerry in that they're finding different ways to win, and it doesn't always have to be box office. And if I would, you know, the big concern for Irish public watching a successful cycle and 1 year out from a World Cup is everyone's chasing from 2018. But the markedly different team in that in 2018 we weren't finding different ways to win. We were playing the exact same way all the time. And exactly what happens when you're successful is you get massively analysed, and everyone went away from our win in 2018 against the All Blacks and just said, right, these guys are number one in the world, let's give them some special attention. Hey ho, they all took about a week off and went, that's exactly how they play, let's just stop it, negate it, it's just physically overpower them, they don't have any other particular options. That's going to happen again. We're world number one, but they're now going to look and they say, okay, they're really good defensive line out. They have a maul. They have a defensive maul and an attacking maul. They have a pretty solid scrum. They've got variation in their attack. They're very good defensively. They can win games through stopping opposition who are physically more powerful than them. They can find ways to break through teams that are physically more powerful than them. If we find ourselves, you know, under the cosh in terms of strength levels, we've sufficient resources to absorb that. And then you look at the debate around Sexton, you say, would you have taken at the end of the November internationals the emergence of Jack Crowley? A lot to do with luck and timing. But yes, it's still an emergence and he's done very well. You've got an injured Frawley who's stepped into the scene in the last 6 months. You've now got Carbery, who's an incumbent already. And then you've got Ross Byrne kind of coming out of the shadows and showing incredible
mental strength, composure.
Just he wanted that kick.
Yeah.
He was signaling like that. You can't buy that in a kicker. There's plenty of kickers wouldn't have been as I suppose definitive in that scenario. He nearly ran over and took the ball before he asked the captain. Do you know? I mean, that's something you can't instill in anyone. And then suddenly you look at that in a knockout scenario in a World Cup, if it's coming down to a kick, a fella who nobody was considering an hour before kickoff is now you're kind of going, could he do a job? Could he go over? Now it's unlikely. I think he would go on a squad, but nonetheless, it was a remarkable moment. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but overall, yeah, I'm fully in agreement with Gerry, and I just think we're in rude health.
Mm. So, if there are aspects of the Irish performance that you might quibble with, you would say first half in particular, Ireland had virtually no real possession in the Australian half, and there was that period where Australia must have got about 25 phases. They didn't do very much with it, but they had phase after phase after phase for minutes on end, and it seemed Ireland were just routinely kicking the ball away, which is very unlike this team. And again, I don't know if that's down to almost nursing Crowley in and experienced team members around him saying, well, let's just feel our way into this game, or if it's something more serious. But certainly Irish possession, and then led by Michael Hooper in particular, you would have to say Australia did a number in the main on Ireland at the breakdown. They either slowed down Irish ball very considerably, or else they had quite a few turnovers. So they'd be the two glaring issues. And maybe Ireland weren't great in the air either, is another aspect of it.
Which is unusual, though.
Unusual,
that's a rare off day.
So they all combined to be quite a big off day, no?
Yes, in terms of the attack, it was an off day completely, and I think Hooper 2 clean turnovers in the first half, and they really stymied Irish momentum at a time when they were building up quick tempo. And the second one was blatantly illegal. He didn't release it all, but he got away with it, so that can happen. And I think he got a third in the second half, and then there was a couple of counter rucks, which they did very well as well. So yes, but I think it's better that Ireland are forewarned now than on the eve of the World Cup, that this is how the teams are going to come after it. There were a few rucks, which I just didn't think they resourced sufficiently. There was only one clear out and he missed the clear out. I think they'll look in great detail at that. I thought that was the lesson from the South African game, and now it's been reinforced by what Australia did. So yes, the Crowley performance was interesting. I'd be really interested to hear Andy's taking it, because as a former at half, we didn't have any chance for a chat beforehand, and I was looking forward to this, see what you'd say about his performance. I watched him again and I thought he had 21 passes only in the game and 2 carries. Like, he didn't have an awful lot of ball. I thought Gibson Park was almost trying to do almost a little bit too much at times, as if it was preordained. Take the pressure off Jack. Yeah. Particularly going blind twice with 15 against 13. When you've got a 7-on-5 in the back line, you go an all or nothing play, one phase on the blind side both times. Now, okay, it came within a hair's breadth of a try when Mac Hansen fired the pass back inside to James Gibbs Park, and everybody said, oh, it would have worked. But the thing about doing that twice was that A, Crowley wasn't involved in either of those plays against 13 men, which would have been nice to see. And secondly, it brought in the touchline as a 14th defender for Australia. It just didn't seem the wisest play, and you can't blame Jack Crowley for that. So I think there was an element of trying to protect him a little bit much, but I really like his body language. I think he strikes the ball really well. He's got a high skill set. I just would have loved to see him. He had to make one carry early on when he was kind of forced into it. He's a really good carrier. He had the least carries of any player in the Irish team. You would have liked to see him just do a little bit more, because he's got that in his locker. He can beat anybody in a phone box.
Yeah, he scored a try, I think, was it 3 seasons ago for the under-20s from within his own 22, that very few rugby players at any age group, representative club, schools, international, it's just the type of try that very few people can score. So I certainly had flagged that 3-4 years ago, and certainly wasn't alone.
What do you think of his performance, Jack?
On Saturday, what I'd be delighted if I was him,
right?
Because to underplay your card and underplay what you've got in your first international is a better outcome than overplay your hand, make 3 howlers and have 3 good things happen too, because everyone immediately questions then your ability to manage the team. So what he came in relatively seamlessly. He didn't disrupt things in terms of stability. He fell into patterns, and that takes a lot of control and reserve. And I don't know if that was his own level of confidence to say, I'm just going to come in, I'm not going to try and be Johnny, I'm not going to try and prove myself overly to everyone. He did the very basic parts of his job. It reminds me of, you know, the midfielder you might see in an understated role in the Premiership, who seems to be always passing sideways a little bit and not making any telling passes. That's fine, I think, in your first international, in the circumstances that happened. I think he was protected by Gibson Park, which is a plus, because Gibson Park has the ability to do that and take pressure off Johnny Sexton if needs be on a given day. There's one thing that, Joe, you're asking was, you know, where are there issues, or, you know, in a cumulative off day, where are there issues that we're seeing in this team? There's a consistent issue that's gone on for years, is our inability to get out of our 22, for my mind, with clarity and efficiency. And a prime example would be, you have Jack Crowley, who's a good boot, a right footer, and it's the same when Sexton's there, by the way. We're passing now directly behind the ruck or at an angle to a left footer, and whether it's James Lowe, and on Saturday it was Jimmy O'Brien. You're closing down his angle massively, and he's kicking to touch on his left foot. It just makes no sense on any level. The alternative to that is a wayward or aimless box kick at times. No one yet has explained to me convincingly why you can't stand at 10 at 45 degrees from the ruck, kicking it like right to left with a curve that is in favour of that, and kick it 60 metres. Everybody's capable of it. And we have literally taken it out of our game for about 4 years. So we spend loads of time in our own 22 on a regular basis, needlessly. Lights are doing something funny here, sorry. But
the exits haven't been great in this window.
The exits haven't been great for a long, long time.
I thought they were better in New Zealand. I think part of the problem actually is because Gibson Park is quite rusty, that some of the spots have been quite poor.
Yeah, and it's just something that is, in a team that seems to be extremely well managed, that has variation in their game, it just doesn't add up to me that we won't give ourselves a break and a breather at times and get it to the right footer, to launch it as long as possible, and trust what is a very good defence in terms of tackles, in terms of tackle count, in terms of defensive system and work rate. Trust it, kick it 60 metres, take a breather. As long as you're hanging around your own half, scrambling for an exit, you're adding workload to yourselves in an area that's a tricky area, you know.
And I bring up one more point with him on the same subject you just brought up about Ireland's attacking game. I thought there was quite a lot of lateral running at times.
Yeah.
Did you notice that?
Yeah.
There was quite a lot of lateral running. Unless Stuart McCluskey or Bundy, when he came on, was straightening it up. There was a lot of that. And they were just fanning across.
Well, the Aussies don't have this. Their defensive system, South Africans would be massively shooting out of the line. The Aussies have always been traditionally drift defenders. I think they were the ones who introduced it when nobody knew what defensive systems were. So this kind of up and out, or very kind of passive defence, that they escort you towards the touch lines, and then they get on top of you and try and pilfer the ball. So they do that better than most in terms of that drift defence, and I think we didn't counter that enough. But I would say that's a little bit of a feather in their cap as well. Defensively excellent on the drift for a long, long time.
Yeah, okay.
So if you were to throw all that into the pot, stir it up and reach a conclusion, are Ireland being worked out more so now than they were a couple of months ago? Is that what's going on here? Or is it more Irish performance levels?
No, I think teams are just finding ways to be more disruptive, and they will. But they went after the breakdown with a degree of success on Saturday. But when we've got multiple ways to play, they can't focus on every area and negate us in every area. That's the beauty of what's going on at the moment. That's why I'm not certainly not perturbed by a win against Australia when you lose Johnny Sexton 20 minutes before kick-off. We've still got the wherewithal to go out and beat them. And no, I'm not overly concerned that teams are finding it easier to play us. They're just finding ways to be more disruptive. And I think we will, in due course, find ways to counter that.
I could never understand why Ireland started the week as 14-point favourites against a side that came that close to beating France, who could now be 4 from 4 in this tour.
Yeah.
Like they should have beaten the All Blacks in Melbourne.
Yeah.
They've beaten South Africa. As a 9th ranked side in the world, they're probably the best ever 9th ranked side in the world.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
What were you seeing, Gerry, at the breakdown? Why were Ireland being stymied?
Like I said earlier, looking back at it again, it was a lot of physicality. They were just going after it. Hooper's brilliant over the ball. He's always been historically one of the best in the business. And there were times when just the clean out was missed, or it looked like there should have been another player there, and that wasn't there. So I think Paul O'Connell will forensically look at that, and they'll come up with solutions. They'll go through every one where the ball was delayed beyond 3, 4, 5 seconds. There was a fair few of those. It was a tough game for Gibson Park
because they've been so good there over the last year.
And it's the lifeblood of their attack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On Sexton, just curious, so there's the Crowley versus Sexton, what their contributing aspect in nuts and bolts terms. But there is something with this Irish team increasingly where it does feel like when Sexton's not on the pitch, there are so many other things that don't function quite as smoothly as well. Like, when's the last game without Sexton? And it's not a great question because he's played the vast majority of them. But when's the last time without him Ireland have really ticked on a whole host of ways?
Well, there's been very few. And the first one that springs to mind is Argentina a year ago, last November. Joey played really well. He played 50, 60 minutes at out half and then went really well when he went back to full-back. And Ireland won convincingly that day. Now, anytime you win convincingly, then it comes with caveats. It's like England winning 6-2 today, therefore Iran must be terrible. So Argentina were at the end of a very difficult, long year, spent living in a bubble and travelling and all of that. But the attack was really fluent that day. I'm trying to think of a frontline match that Johnny Sexton has missed since then.
It's Paris.
Oh, Paris, yes. Yep.
I'm thinking of Rory O'Connor often mentions it, that James Ryan line where he was in effect paying tribute to Johnny. You know, so Johnny had reached yet another milestone, I'm not sure which Johnny Sexton had, and Ryan said, look, when he's at training, everything's up a notch. When he's around, everything's up a notch. Now, the counterpoint to that...
when he's not there.
Yeah. And so, I don't know, do you sense that in this? Things are just...
And when he's on the pitch, he's like a player coach, isn't he? He's constantly pulling players into position, and there just seems to have always that many more options for him as a result.
Yeah.
Do you remember that time, the second half, when Jack Coley's going left to right, and he's got Hugo Keenan almost too close to him, and he's got Tyke Byrne flat, and there's a pass out the back to Stuart McCluskey, and he goes through with the pass to Tyke Byrne as he's being hit by one of the Aussie second rows.
Yeah.
You don't see that happen that much when Johnny's there, do you?
I don't know why this popped into my head. I was not looking at Gerry, but remember the film Teen Wolf with Michael J. Fox?
I've never seen it.
It's around my age, and he was basically a basketball player who turned into a werewolf, and he'd inherited this weird thing from his father, but the whole thing became they couldn't play without Teen Wolf because he was the wolf, he ran the team, he was the alpha male or the wolf in the team. A bit ridiculous as an analogy, but ultimately the team had to learn to cope without him, and it's a very similar albeit weird analogy to say we have to cope without Johnny, and I think we're doing our absolute best in the circumstances. He is a generational player. New Zealand were not the same without Carter. England were not the same without Wilkinson. Everyone didn't completely obsess about who we got to replace him while he's there. He's still here, and while he's not there, we've now got a team that plays in a way that dilutes responsibility anyway across the team. You've got front rowers like Furlong coming in and being first receiver more than ever before. You've got this unique kind of setup in attack, the structure where we can hit runners, we can go out the back door. You've got multiple options in midfield. You've got the likes of McCluskey coming in, playing 3 games and adding huge value where we've already got value. And I just think it's as good as it could possibly be without him at the moment. And then you've also got players who are all good enough. Like, people need to cool the jets and say, Ross Byrne is good enough to play international rugby. Joey Carbery is good enough to play. Kieran Frawley is good enough. And now we've got Jack Crowley. Like, how many do we want? We don't. If Johnny's not there, fine. We just got to get on with it a bit, I think. And the team needs a bit of support in that sense as well. There's a kind of a bit of hyperbole, obviously. God, when he pulls out, everyone gets frantic. We went out and won. That was panic stations, no doubt.
There's a part of Andy Farrell that probably would have welcomed it. This is a test. This is a test of our team. He loves late disruptions.
Exactly what this coaching team are good at.
Yeah.
Bringing in someone like Crowley
Whereas Joe wouldn't have liked that because it would have been uncontrollable.
Exactly. He would have gone bananas, and the team would have felt that fear.
Yeah.
And
yes, there would have been an anxiety. Because I don't know, you mightn't have seen the pre-match interview with Farrell. You were watching on TV, I know.
Yeah.
I would have said Andy Farrell was almost giddy.
Yeah.
At the late withdrawal.
He wants everything thrown at them as much as possible before the World Cup.
I couldn't have planned this better.
Because this could happen.
Maybe
he
did plan it. I'm still.
I actually, the conspiracy theorist, the middle-aged conspiracy theorist, sitting at home with a glass of wine. I went, come off it. But then I realised the one thing I saw was Crowley was wearing Sexton's jersey. You could see it in the bottom the names now. And Ross Byrne, who took the kick, there's a brilliant photo on the Leinster Rugby website, and he's wearing Jack Crowley's jersey. So my conspiracy theory went out the window, sitting at home with my glass of wine. But I mean, you're so right. The Farrell kind of got off on that, and that's a brilliant trait because stuff goes wrong, and stuff goes wrong badly at World Cups. You want someone who gets off on that and says right, and the rest of the team rise up to it. It's like, can you step up? And that's a brilliant psychological approach for this current group of Irish players, where it's not fear and avoidance, it's like embrace it.
Ultimately, just one last thing, ultimately Ireland won, like I said at the very beginning of this.
Sorry,
if Ireland hadn't won, then we would be going to town on the Johnny Sexton dependency theory.
Totally. Here's the point. The negative view, but I think it's valid. If South Africa have an out half, they win that game. I think Razzie, on the flight home, if he's not on Twitter, is secretly chatting with the coaching staff and saying, Ireland, that's fine. We've got that boxed off. Not worried about that. Out half, we'll win that game. Neutral venue. No worries at all. And we're telling ourselves, we've handled a big team. And I think we're a little too cocksure of that all of a sudden. And then secondly, if Australia had a modicum of discipline, they would have won that game. And if Will Skelton, and I know ifs, buts, maybes, injuries, Will Skelton had started that game but fit enough to play, it might have been a very different story as well. So I think there is a real degree of us reading too much into the results and not looking enough at these performances. And then we would be having the Sexton debate. And I still think the Sexton debate is more alive than ever, because how did Joey Carbery do? Well, to quote Gordon Darcy last week, he did fine, but fine's not really good enough. And Jack Crowley, for his second cap, did very well. But if we're going to fast track this guy, there's 5-6 international games left. So
I think fine is good enough. Fine is good enough as long as the apex or the fulcrum of your team isn't built around the 10. And this team, they've diluted that role away from Sexton because they have loads of players and options, and they want to be versatile. And they've done this. They have an imprint of doing this now for about a year and a half, and it makes us more sustainable, far more difficult to beat, and more adaptable in these little crisis moments with an injury or selection. So you're dead right. Like, we could have lost to South Africa
and Australia. If
Australia.
Either of them had a better out half.
And Australia obviously have discipline issues. Yeah. But I would still look at the overall performance and say there's so much capacity to improve in that group compared to 2018, where they're at peak levels playing a repetitive and predictable game, and they peaked in 2018. And that's a very different scenario. So you know what I mean?
Totally fair point, and a really good nuance point. But we should underline this November then by saying Ireland are really going to have to improve in lots of ways.
Yeah, I would have thought so. So is everyone else. Like, we're world number one. I certainly don't think the group are the type. They're just not the type, and we're too hurt from history. Yeah. No one's getting carried away. Not one person in that group is walking around.
And it's great that Andy Farrell was part of that coaching ticket and has a different coaching philosophy, and that Johnny and so many of the leading players were part, so they know what went wrong in 2018-19. They're more adaptable. Look, it is what it is. This team has a better chance of going far in the World Cup with Johnny Sexton at 10. But hey, we knew that anyway.
But the England team that won in 2003, and I had a close link to that from my playing years over in England, and the stories I heard from Greenwood and Jason Leonard, and they weren't peak level until that World Cup happened. But what they were doing was winning tests ugly, winning tests pretty, just winning games. And they were finding ways. They went down to New Zealand and won, much like Ireland have done. They won their autumn tests. They just found ways to do it using different personnel and different styles. And it seems to be a big parallel there in this current group. Not peaking, but
they were winning matches for about 2 years with no Mike Catt. But then actually Johnny Wilkins was a little off colour in the World Cup.
Yeah.
They brought Mike Catt, which was Clive Woodward's one surprise selection.
Yeah.
And he played a vital goal in taking some of the heat and pressure off Johnny Wilkinson in the semi-final, in the quarter-final off the bench, in the semi-final, and an extra time in the final. So, I think Ireland have those kind of options, and I think I take your point, Joe, entirely. I've come away from both those games thinking, yep, Ireland got away with one there. I mean, I actually wrote the men in goal will be kicking themselves all week because that was a golden chance. Really was a goal. They must be tearing their hair out. They could be 4 from 4 now in this tour.
They don't strike me as an intelligent team. They really don't. And that might sound derogatory, but if you keep giving 16, 18 penalties away in an international, this is going on about 6 months.
It's very, very bad.
You're like, sorry, that is just
4 neck rolls in the first half. That's got to be a record.
The neck roll thing was off the charts.
I don't know. It just doesn't strike me as an intelligent group of people if they're not learning from it or changing it. I don't know how that's happening at international level, but they're repeat offenders, which is unforgivable.
They are missing a few frontline players, though, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're a threat to the next World Cup because, Australian World Cups. That's how fluid. I remember Matt. I think Matt made a similar point on TV.
Yes,
it's very open, fluid, and competitive at the moment.
I think
there's no runaway team.
Point worth making. Yeah.
Maybe France at home. Maybe
because I think Ireland obviously had the benefit of New Zealand at a low ebb in the summer, which really helps your ranking points when you win a series down there.
True.
France, I think, played Japan, didn't they, during the summer? So you're not getting a huge amount of ranking points. I think the general feeling is France, not least with home advantage, are a little bit ahead of everyone, are certainly favourites. But it is wide.
I watch a lot of them because I just find France compelling, and their real problem position was full back with Melvin Jaminet. He couldn't catch cold, remember? He was a great goal kicker, and he's got some other strengths to his game. But Thomas Ramos, been playing all season brilliantly that half for Toulouse, comes in at full-back. He's a metronomic goal kicker and he's just a better natural footballer at both full-back and then half. What a weapon to have. So he's come through. The former captain in the back row, Olivon is back and playing brilliantly as well. Damien Penno is still, they've had a really good month. And you know what the great advantage they've got is, not only do they play at home, but before every game, 80,000 people sing La Marseillaise. It's a huge lift. Like, you listen to the Aussie national anthems in ours last Saturday night by comparison. It's going to be extraordinary atmosphere for all their home games. So they are favourites at this juncture, no doubt.
One last quick question to wrap all that conversation up. If you were given the option of investing more time in Crowley or Carbery for the Six Nations as being on the bench behind Johnny for the Six Nations, based on what you've seen, who?
I would probably go for Crowley.
Really?
Crowley, yeah. Because I think that's not based on what I've seen. That's based on what I think it has in terms of potential. I think Joey has hit a kind of
plateau.
Yeah. I think a plateau in his play at 10. And it's not a low level plateau. It's a kind of moderate, stable level of play. And I think Crowley has the capacity maybe to do a bit more. He's less baggage in the tank in terms of the injuries. He came on the pitch against Fiji. He grabbed the ball to kick a penalty to touch, and he went to the 5 metre line. He didn't go to the 10, the 15. Most 10s, even the established ones, are just going to kick for safe touch. They're not, and that also grates with me because you're a professional player. You got to squeeze every inch out of your penalties to touch. He nailed it to the 5 metre line with his first touch in international rugby. That strikes me as someone who's got this inner belief, deep inner belief in what he's capable of.
His body language conveys that too. His enthusiasm, his energy conveys all of that.
So
and he actually seems to be playing with a little bit more enthusiasm and energy than Joey is at the moment.
Yeah, I think Joey is.
Love to see that swagger back.
Yeah, and Joey has the option that I've always pushed for Joey at 10 in terms of if he can be more of an independent threat on his own. That doesn't seem to be happening in his game for quite a period of time, but he's definitely worth being involved in and around the squad. But I think it'd be worth looking at Crowley in a couple of Six Nations games. I also think if that neither of those options are there, Frawley did really, really well, and as another guy who he's a lad who seems to be unfazed in the Irish green
very
number 10 jersey
too, and versa.
Yeah.
Part of the issue here is what Munster do next.
I know. Limerick will decide this ultimately.
There's Ben Healy there as well. Like Jack Crowley came into this window as third choice Munster at half, having just, like I said earlier, only started 6 matches ever, 10 for Munster. Part of that is COVID related, but it's the traffic jam at 10 in Munster as well, when you think that JJ was there for a while. So what what will they do next? I mean, how many games will Jack Crowley start at 10 between now and the Six Nations for Munster?
Is Andy Farrell allowed to get on the phone and say, Graham?
Well, he might have better joy with Graham than he would with anybody else, given they're quite close, and Graham knew in the block. I don't know, but yeah. What we do know about Andy Farrell, though, and Mike Catt and the rest of the coaching ticket is they're quite prepared to go against the provincial pecking order.
Oh, sure.
They've done it repeatedly. You know, the Gibson Park really was behind Luke McGrath when they decided he's coming into us.
Yeah.
And there's been other examples of that as well.
Yeah.
So.
But a 10 needs minutes, you know.
Yeah,
even
and
that's Ollie Campbell, who was a great mentor to me, and Irish rugby legend and famous out half. You cannot judge a 10 until he's played 3 consecutive 80 minutes in a row. That would be his mantra, and I fully agree with it.
Really?
Yeah. You need 3. Now, that's not going to happen for any of them between now and the World Cup, so they've got to make a gamble.
My guess is that if he's fit, Joey Carbery will start the Heineken Cup games for Munster between now and the Six Nations, which makes it likelier that he's going to come in as the number 2 to Johnny. So if they're all fit, it's a little bit similar at centre, like Stuart McCluskey starts 3 tests and does very well. But Bundy's cameo at the end kind of makes you think that if Bundy, Robbie and Stuart McCluskey are all fit, he's still third in the pecking order. So it's going to be difficult for them to get time for Jack Crowley, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. We're going to take a very short break. Gerry and Andy are staying with us. Our rugby coverage here and Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us. The Nick White controversy, obviously a significant aspect of the game in Dublin. Back in just 1 second.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Welcome back. Gerry Thornley, Andy Dunne still with us. During the ad break we started talking about the out-half situation again. We're not going to do that. Heaven knows we're not, but we went right back to it during the ad break. So the Nick White controversy as it's become now, because subsequent to returning to the field on Saturday evening, he's been ruled out of the Wales game. He's been stood down for 12 days. Sydney Morning Herald did interesting detail on what was going on behind the scenes on Saturday. So there was the Mac Hansen tackle, which he made on the sideline, and the Australian team doctor and the independent match doctor were viewing those pictures on the sideline, and it was whilst they were viewing those pictures that incident 2 happened. That was where
his head went off. Josh went
went
his
off his knee / ground. It was hard to see exactly to what extent he took a dunt off the knee, but appeared to. And the period where he was stumbling then on the pitch, both doctors reportedly missed that because they were busy viewing the first incident. And in some respects, that makes a degree of sense, or certainly that explains why he came back onto the pitch, because the rules are very, very clear on this point. Any player with suspected concussion, is immediately and permanently removed.
Without even recourse to an HIA, yeah.
HIA not necessary, and one of the indicators of concussion is unsteady on feet, balance problems, poor coordination. They were very visible, and Ben O'Keefe, the referee, was caught on his microphone saying, "I saw him stumble." So clearly, if the doctors had seen him stumble, they would have understood straight away no HIA is required and he's permanently removed from the field of play. So it didn't make sense. His return didn't make sense on Saturday night. It makes sense now, but it's still a shambles.
It makes more sense now, and we should be grateful for the explanation, because it wasn't a good look at all for the game on Saturday, given what the game is currently going through and the crisis that it's facing in this issue. I'm reluctant to even make any opinion as to whether Nick White was concussed or not. I'm not a doctor.
And it's irrelevant, actually.
Yeah, it's irrelevant what any journalist thinks. We're not neurologists.
But it's irrelevant whether or not he was concussed.
Yeah, well, yeah, that too. But it's also irrelevant what my opinion on it is, because I'm not qualified.
Sure.
But it was a bad look for the game. It was surprising he came back on. What was really scary, Joe, was listening to him talk after. He's one of the 2 Australian players that were brought into the media.
Yeah, what was that about? Of all the players?
Were
they sending him down out to
if he was concussed, it just shows you that, well, to be able to speak coherently 20 minutes after full-time whistle or half an hour later is clearly no indicator, because you never would have thought that this guy got a head knock during the game the way he spoke, and he spoke like Nick White ever would have done, I would have thought. But anyway, so yeah, I guess it's a bad look for the sport. It was surprising to see him come back on. I'm glad it's been clarified, and it's almost a relief to hear he's been stood down for 12 days, isn't it?
Yeah. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's a confusing area. I'm understating that ever so slightly. The Aussie culture is a bit different, I think, sporting culture. If you look at the NRL, rugby league is a much bigger sport down there, and Aussie rules obviously. But if you watch even the grand final of the NRL just gone, or State of Origin, like absolutely lawless head contact, tackle technique, commentators, hollering and whooping when a guy gets a headshot and people are wobbling around on the field. That's still part of their sporting culture that dictates, who turns up and watches it, that dictates TV viewing figures. There's a baying for blood in their sporting public, and I think, to be honest, that's in a lot of sporting publics. But if you're a game that's on its knees down in Australia, and the NRL has this more gladiatorial approach and less concern for the welfare of players, I could also understand the Aussies just trying to say, look, we'll try and get on with it a bit. I don't agree with it in any way, but I can see from a cultural point of view, they're up against it there in terms of their what are they selling in terms of the game. And so I then you get into all kinds of grey areas between what's the message from the coaching team? What are they trying to say when people are taking a knock? Are they saying, look, we'll get up and get on with it unless we can prove otherwise? There's all kinds of conjecture, and you're getting into tricky territory, and it was a standout moment because rugby has become very well regulated, even though there's still moments where there's not 100% clarity.
Yeah.
Rugby has become quite homogenised and well regulated to where it was 10 years ago.
And to be fair to rugby, compared to what we're seeing at the World Cup this afternoon in the England-Iran game,
14 minutes start for a keeper that can't be temporarily replaced.
they are miles behind in football.
Yeah. No, I think rugby union needs to give itself a little pat on the back in that sense. But
There's a lot of ground to make up, though, Andy.
Yeah, it did. But there are other sports, and the other thing is you can't eliminate risk from rugby union. You can't, people are watching UFC, and it's barbaric. People getting a shin kick to the cheekbone, but there's a hell of a lot of people paying pay-per-view fights. You've got NRL in Australia where there's massive. I'm not condoning it, but I'm saying, where do you draw the line? If you ask a consultant neurologist, how do you eliminate risk further from rugby? I had a friend who had a tragic spinal injury at 17. He didn't have a head contact. He tackled someone at hip level. You cannot eliminate physical contact and collision from rugby union much more than you're currently doing. So, they're doing pretty well.
I agree with you, but if this window and last summer highlights into me, there's still a long way to go, and there isn't. There's a surprising lack of uniformity in approach to this in the global game at the moment. Like the red card in the second test for the All Blacks, that put Gary Ringrose out of the third test. That put him out of that match in the second and the third test. It was quite shocking to hear former All Blacks legends on television saying, "Oh, that's just a rugby incident. The game's gone soft." It's kind of, do not know what's going on in the game. Vern Cotter came in after the Fiji game and completely disputed that red card and asked, "Was that foul play?" Yes, it was. I'm wondering, do we have to bring down a line and a jersey?
Potentially.
And potentially, I think
Might
we
come
do.
to that.
Yeah.
A few questions do need to be asked, though, of the Australian coaching staff and their medical team.
I would agree.
Did they see the pictures in the coach's box that we all saw on television of their players stumble?
I would have thought so.
Why did they not feel an obligation, or did they not hear in the ref mic O'Keefe say he saw a stumble? Did they? It's just a question, but I think it's a valid one. Did they not feel an obligation to make sure that their medical team knew that there had been a stumble if they'd seen the pictures? The other question which needs to be asked is the HIA process is fundamentally flawed. We are working towards saliva tests and other tests to definitively diagnose concussion. At the moment, we don't have those tools. We have a HIA. It's the best anyone can manage in a bid to try and keep at least a game going and people on the pitch, which is the reality. Because otherwise, any doctor would just say, "Oh, just come off. Exercise extreme caution." There's a degree of trying to manage the physicality of rugby. So the HIA is not perfect and has never claimed to be perfect. And that's proved by the fact Jeremy Loughman passed during the summer and Nick White passed. The scary parallels in this situation, with Loughman, New Zealand Rugby came out and said, look, the stadium, whatever way it was set up, the medics didn't have access to the footage of him stumbling. And so it only seemed it was at half time.
That's right, yeah.
That it was identified. Mm-hmm. Who knows, would a word come from Dublin, people texting saying, have you not seen what's happened here? Who knows how that arrived? But the scary thing here is, for me, we now need to ask what's going on in HIAs. How, as part of a diagnosis, video footage is not a fundamental part of that, I don't know. Like, if you were a doctor doing a HIA, the first thing you'd want to look at is the footage of the incident. Yeah. Let me see it, and let me see.
But generally, that is the case, isn't it?
Afterwards.
That is generally the case.
But the point is, so the explanation here is that, well, and I sort of accept the explanation, it's not ideal, but the explanation is, well, they were looking at the first incident when the second one happened, so they didn't see it. Okay, fine. But you then have 10 minutes where the player is off the pitch. At that point, surely the first thing anyone is doing before you start asking the questions and what day of the week it is and all the other stuff is, let me see the footage of the second incident. Let me see the player's behaviour after the incident before we proceed with this HIA. Let's rule out criteria 1 issues. Like, what's the point in the guidelines of having these criteria 1 issues? Dazed, lacking balance, if you're not going to double check those things. I'm not a doctor, I could tell he stumbled.
Yeah.
So for me, that HIA system is now completely undercut. My faith in the HIA system is completely undercut because that player stumbled and the HIA system did not identify it. We're in a world-class stadium, world-class facility, there are television pictures. Your HIA didn't look at what had happened. You went straight into whatever the tests are, and HIAs are not perfect. The footage was conclusive. And that, for me, like, World Rugby need to come out and explain why video evidence is not being used in HIAs at the weekend there.
It is being used and has been used for years. And the Aviva, I remember Dr. Ina Falvey taking us around, giving the journalists an extended tour of this whole process, the undergrounds of the stadium and the stands. And when they're running out on the pitch, the physio or wherever, they've got an earpiece with the doctor telling them, who's looking at the footage. And he's been with World Rugby, I don't know how long, because that's been in place for 5-6 years at least, if not longer. So this was a mistake, and somehow them not examining all the footage as soon as they should have done. Even when Nick White was down the second time, that's when they should have been looking at the second incident there.
Well, but they may not have enough manpower. But and I can actually appreciate that. It's quite unfortunate for Nick White to be involved in 2 incidents in quick succession. They're examining the first, the second one happens. That's fine. Not ideal, it's fine. But then when they're in under the stand doing the HIA, everyone take a deep breath. I'm just going to have a look at the 2 incidents. You wait there a moment, Nick.
Does seem that that's what should have been done.
Think about common sense, Joe. It's not very common.
But is that not in the HIA protocol? Like, step 1, before you get into asking Nick questions or testing Nick, I'm just going to watch the footage over here while you wait here, because I want to rule out stumbles and dizziness and all that stuff. And Loughman, this happened in the summer, and now here we are, and that part is inexplicable. No?
Yeah, and particularly the Aviva Stadium for a fully fledged Tier 1 test match. And the facilities are there, the camera work is there, it's all there, it's all available to them. They're all mic'd up to each other. It's like, yes, it should have been done. I'm at a loss to know why it didn't happen.
That for me is the crucial.
Yeah.
So people have come out and said, oh, well, that explains it, how it happened. And it does, but it doesn't explain how the HIA didn't find it under the stands when they have the 10 minutes. That's what the 10 minutes is for.
Yeah.
To everyone.
Yeah, he was back on in 8 minutes, wasn't he? I think it was 8 minutes he was off the pitch.
Okay.
So that's 8 minutes there, that window, for them to look at the footage of both incidents.
I thought it was 13, but regardless. It should be the first port of call.
Yeah.
And then that HIA could have lasted 2 minutes, because it would have been, oh, he stumbled. We're not doing the HIA. Nick, put your feet up, relax. And so you send him back out there to make more tackles against lads twice his size. You know, that's the...
Yeah, and there's an element
thing.
we're past the watershed in terms of shithousery that goes on in the coaching teams. Like, there's plenty of times I've seen coaches who will want to push and squeeze the limit on every single situation and scenario they can, and they'll be sending in messages and they'll be putting pressure on medics. That's when I'm not suggesting this was one of those moments, but I've seen countless, and I don't believe professional coaches, when the walls are closing in and results matter, are looking at these incidents and thinking with absolute clarity, I need to protect every single player and their welfare. Some of them are thinking, he's probably grand, how can we tweak it, how can we,
I think there's less of that, Andy, now in the current climate. I think there's much, but by the same token, I also know of one very well-known coach who once upon a time coached Ireland, once upon a time coached Wales, and several times has coached the Lions, so you can guess who it was. And he is well known within the medical centre, with all the doctors he's worked with, of just saying, that's your call, you decide if he's fit or not. He would never, ever try to influence a doctor or a medic, and never has done.
Yes.
So there's the other side of it as well. Look, that's for them. This is not our area.
Yeah.
That's for the doctors to decide.
Yeah. And you would hope, my sense is the majority are increasingly in that space, that very positive space. And like I thought, you know, Matt Williams made a very fair point. Trust the medics. You know, we're not qualified, but that's not to say mistakes are not being made. And this was a big mistake. And it comes hot on the heels of a very similar mistake in the Lockman case. So we're definitely entitled to be asking questions of the medics, because that's still, they've explained that to a point, but we have to find out why HIA are not taking individual.
Well, yeah, and World Rugby have to get the bottom, make sure to try and reduce the risk of this ever happening again.
Yeah.
The lessons have to be learned
Yes.
from this. Absolutely have to be learned.
It is improving. Like, I'm just throwing this in at the end. Relative to where we were 5, 6, 7 years ago, and then relative to another sport very close by, which is rugby league, it's massively improved. And again, you can't fully eliminate risk, but you can get better procedures. And I fully agree with you there on that. But I would contend it's improving. Ish.
Yeah. Very quickly, it would seem remiss of us for Josh van der Flier to become the third player in history of rugby in this country to win World Player of the Year, not to at least mention it. So Josh van der Flier joins Keith Wood, Johnny Sexton. That's mad company. You know, you think Wood, Sexton, and now Van der Flier up in that. That's really rarefied atmosphere.
Did still never win it?
No, never. It was robbed.
Robbed in 09.
Should have won it in 09.
Sure he won it. Sorry, okay.
Now, it is only based on international performances, so what you do, captaining your province to the Heineken Cup doesn't come into it, like he did in that year. But
Lions would count as international, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Exceptional, that Lions.
For all his international caps, vast majority of
Ireland winning the Grand Slam clearly did.
No. Like, I did a piece on Josh on the basis that he might win this for last Saturday's paper. Like, just even the fact that he made the 4-man shortlist deserved to be acknowledged, in addition to Johnny. And we know Johnny's a generational player and a former winner. And can you believe that back in 2021, last year only, in the Six Nations, in rounds 3 and 4, Will Connors started and he wasn't even in the 23.
Yeah.
On the Wednesday before the final game against England, Will Connors injured his knee, and Josh van der Flier came into the team. He didn't have an exceptional game, but with Will Connors still out, he started the following summer against Japan, had an outstanding game, man the match, scored a try. I remember the first game that season, I think it was against the Bulls at the Aviva, 15,000 people back in. He scored the first try of the season with a 25-metre sprint, running a trailer, picked up a loose ball, bang, gone like a winger. I went, whoa. And you just talk to everybody, we've talked to a lot of people today about him and others about him. He's played 10 out of 11 games for Ireland this season. He's only missed 8 minutes of the third test against New Zealand. His figures are ridiculous. 26 tackles the weekend.
I know, I felt like he was quiet at the weekend.
Yeah, but he was brilliant defensively.
Yeah.
But the way he actually went away at 28 years of age to reinvent himself as a really potent carrier, as well as this tackling machine, who's coming up constantly now with big plays in games. It actually just shows, it's a great example, not only to other number 7s out there, it's a great example to any player, even in his late 20s, that, as one former international put it to me yesterday, the only ceiling that you can provide in front of players are the ones they put there themselves. He's a great source of inspiration to a lot of players. And he's a top bloke.
Yeah.
Seems to be a beloved person as well.
Nobody will say a bad word about him.
Rob Carney in studio was insane. He's about the nicest person I've ever met.
Yeah.
No, that reinvention is to me is key in a lot of this. He was a very kind of Neil Back mould. Neil Back was not renowned for anything in terms of offensive play, ball carrying, and Van der Flier had that whole part of his game completely stitched up. But I think Lancaster was quite an influence on that.
Yeah, and so was Farrell. He told him to go away and do what he do. And all the coaches at Leinster.
Dennis Leamy was like put a bit of timber on and get more explosive. Like, that's not easy to do either. But
what he really worked on was the timing of his runs, the depth and the angles he came off. He worked on this to such an extent that I'd say, like, a lot of players, they go into a carry and they go, get up, I gave myself, put about 80% of myself into that. Something clicked with Josh about a year or two ago, and he started doing every carry at 100%, and he's not gone back.
And I do seem to remember him saying that early on in his career, and this is testament to his kind of team spirit, but he had Sean O'Brien's here, so, makes sense for him to carry, and so he's almost encouraged, give it to Sean and let him carry.
Yeah.
Whereas now he's
It was
on
great
Andy
to
Farrell's
see someone
advice,
with
stepped
that
up.
attitude and that team first attitude win an individual World Sports Player of the Year accolade.
Yeah.
They would tend to be, Woody was not the type of character who'd be like, well, Sean O'Brien's here. He'd be like, give me the
Yes,
ball.
I'm gonna drop
I
goal.
will do it. I'll do the drop goal as well. And Sexton is of that ilk, but obviously that's his position too. But
Yes.
yeah, it's nice to see a complete team man be that impactful enough to win World Player of the Year and justifiably.
We are right out of time. Gerry Thornley of the Irish Times. I'll see you soon. Next week or two.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course, your man is going into hibernation now.
Hibernation. Will we see you again? Six Nations.
Six
Would you do a
Nations,
Champions
Andy?
Cup
Oh, yeah.
game for us?
Maybe.
Would you lower yourself to Champions Cup? You would.
We'll have a chat.
Andy Dunne with us. Take care. Have a great Christmas. We'll see you when we see you. No, we'll nag Andy to coming back before then. Rugby and Off the Ball, thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.